only to squander it all away when capitalism and trinkets were flashed before their eyes. The four divisions always had their part, and now were the ruling factor. Those who were their robots, who never questioned the directive from early on, would be the wardens, the presidents, the bosses, the rich. Though Stellar was not alone, there were few of his kind, those that were all the power of the four, to complete a whole, as in four pieces to the puzzle, as in a complete machine, which now could vibrate from the center and thus without, making the sixth, which was the seventh, which was the eighth, and so that the 9 and the 13th, transient piece of the puzzle. His head was killing him. He drank that toilet starch, as they called it, and played a candlelit game of cards into the wee hours of the night, when the soul and body were in a sort of alliance themselves, but the spirit would go on alone, the dark one here, to be of its own antithesis, whoever this body was governed by. Stellar only saw glimpses of its past lives. Unfair to call any spirit an it, but he had such contempt for it, for the thought of it. A spoiled brat in his life before this, Bill was, called Geoffrey Tuttles, a boy given everything, never to have developed himself, only to stay the child of a rich printer, and so did he pass away young at the age of 42, never to marry nor learn anything of any significance, only living and accepting a life of pure mediocrity. But of course, the divisions were always there to blame, for they were working hard for just this. It wasn't so much this fact of the divisions, nor the sad outcome of a life shuffled by they, but what one intended to do, which was the measure of the soul in the make. Geoffrey's spirit would not build at all, and would thus succumb to the tortures of a life of antithesis, where he had nothing and little choice to become more. No one would fully remember their pasts, not even Stellar, but he had learned to master his internal workings. After so many lifetimes of such a magnitudinal measure, Geoffrey was not yet a soul, not like Stellar's massive spiritual form, but he was to learn in his next life. This Stellar could see, and this gave Stellar great consolation. There would still be events and changes. How else but an impression of free will would one even wish or will to go on? Geoffrey into Bill, and Bill into Virginia would change the shape of society in some way and open up many people's lives as to become a seeming separate voice from the divisions and make a statement about the rights of those who were bred to be less. There had to be a motivation, and antithesis over the long seemed to work quite well for most. The shovelhead nearly made contact with the same place it had as Charles Wayne, the captain, who had past life secrets of his own to shame, would be a perfect and cruel marksman, and prided himself on it. A sharpshooter from an early age, he would kill many, never having to look into their eyes. But he wanted to, only he was afraid, and he would see himself reflected back, and this gain a glimpse of Blackjack 21. All souls in the make knew this, and could not explain it. It was the transient space, that place where the building of a soul into a spirit and the events that tested the body into spiritual source and form were in the process of constant active transmission, easily able to evade most times until the 13th test of lifetimes came, which the divisions were trying to consolidate as a factory to completely control the quality of life within the sphere of exist. Of course, the divisions were being told what to do, as if a master chess player had used the same basic concepts on the multitude, understanding there were truly only 18 reoccurring personalities to master, and 3 that would be a study of the ages to fully grasp. This kept the blackjack busy well enough, and now he had his minions to do his work. Bill's hand had perfectly clutched the shovel, grabbing it near its head, inches from the sharp metal point. Charles Wayne sadistically centered to aim at Bill's left eyebrow bone, to cause another scar, to chip away the bone enough to leave his temple even wider open, so that one day he could say it was just bad luck on Bill's part, and that he was a bad catch. After all, no one really cared, as long as it was open and shut and out of wasting any more court time. Bill's alert eyes, a radiant expressive blue, dilated with a blacker than pitch black purple, right on Charles Wayne's eyes. And Bill was darker, blacker, and Bill knew himself as evil, as a menace. At least he physically could swear so any time. He would recite that in his head, the greatest sinner that ever lived. But he had no idea what this meant, only to be contrasted by a simple life prior, an easy life. But did he know the angst of Khan, or the deception and the hatred of the Iscariot, who would be hated for doing his Lord's very will? For a lifetime is not a closing, but a flicker of space-time towards the all. Soon after a small, inadequate, lumpy, ground, sludgy tin cup of coffee, sadly more chewing involved than drinking, and 3 bites of 3-day-old potato fries cooked in rancid lard, the work had begun. Digging in 110-degree weather, as the captain and his deputy guards would be mostly in the shade, chain-smoking and sipping tea that the warden's daughter would bring them promptly at 2 p.m. daily. Darla Babs was the daughter of Mr. Walter Babs. His official title was Warden of Eastern Block 54. This was just what the government addressed him as. By the public, this was known as an aviation land, 500 acres of closed-off land in the middle of Oklahoma. For those in the know, which were few, this was a test facility for the criminally insane, those who showed psychical aptitude in tests and were tested by a secret EM pulse conductor receiver by Tesla himself, in exchange for his release from the Philadelphia experiment, also known as different names, but we will get into that at some other juncture. It is not wise to let them know how smart you are, if indeed you hold any exceptional abilities, any cards in the least. The only way out of here was on a gurney, which most were, or to go to the next level, level 13 as they called it. A patient, if they were so referred, as the inmates were shifted around quite a bit, sometimes spending weeks, or in some cases days or months in private hospitals, to which no one knew, except for Stellar, of course, where these facilities were located and what they were for. If one showed an aptitude, they could be allowed to become agents themselves, however heavily regulated by now the division heads. One such killer made it to this status after he, seated in the Pegasus chair, after hours of spinning and assisted spins by the EM pulse unit known as the spinner, had focused in on one particular 5-day session, which bent the man's spirit to such an extent that his very powers of clairvoyance, telepathy, second sight, and mind control would become a beacon to the force known as Grundle, god of the abyss, brought back from an ancient time, where once a seemingly primitive tribe of several million, a branch of demon-worshipping Indians, which would be destroyed by the Tiktoosh before the division, 1 million plus years ago, shifted the plates within the spheres of life and sunk the Pangenic plate to what now is the Atlantic, if we are indeed within the same time-space dimension. The force came to him from deep space, cast out beyond the asteroid grid, set there by the Nords. When they forced the yield of the 3 divisions, in folklore, this is taught as the battle between the Olympians and the Titans, which was the embracing of the new force for the old. Black Jack would easily cast away his decoys, aside from the era had met its yield, and he did this with Mammon, Baphomet, Cthulhu, and countless other gods. They would be cast away to watch over their yield, yet also in the wait for the master's call. On Saturn did Grundle reside, to be at war with Chardonnay, for Saturn was cast of two planetary forces at odds, and this was just the physical portion, which was the demonic, spiritual, physical, dimensional aspect to Saturn, called the seventh dimensional zone. This zone was the zone of the porthole. It was here where good and evil was to be felt at its height. Armies of gods, angels, and blackjack's demons would be at wait in their realms, swarming and training for the battle of the all. They had no idea what this really meant. However, it was in the hype that they kept on for the long. All forces would become part of the force by which they culminated and lived. It was in the micro moments, in the intent, and not in the deeds, but in the deed's effect on the one acting. On the deed, in this case, it was Bill, Stellar, and Bill's spirit that were at odds with darkness, a prize of force power or a loss in itself. And Blackjack hated losing to Stellar and to any master of the Bodhi mind.